So to everybody who is here today, thank you. For everybody who invited someone to join us today so they can learn more about the Homeless Alliance, thank you. And for those who are going to share what you're learning here today out with your agencies, your community, thank you. The work that we are doing as a two-county continuum of care, and more importantly, as a network of organizations in every sector working together to serve people, we're making a difference, and I hope you hear that today. What I'd like to do now is to get into a business meeting for the Alliance Board, and that is our consent agenda. We have a few items on the consent agenda today, and so this will be for the members of the board to work through very quickly, I hope. These were all in a packet that was sent out to you. The items for board approval include the agenda for today, the January 13, 2022 ORS 190 Entity and Alliance Board minutes, the Youth Action Board YAB member appointments, the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program governance document, the appointment of Adam Menning, Schmecketa Community College, and Ian Dixon McDonald, Marienpole Food Share to serve as the co-chairs for the Continuum of Care Collaborative Committee and serve on the Board of Directors. 6, the appointment of Chris Berg, HMIS Research Analyst, Oregon Housing and Community Services to the Performance and Evaluation Committee. Those are the 6 items. And if we need to discuss any of them, I would like to either put it into the chat or raise a hand to have that one pulled for the discussion. Going once, going twice. Then we'll need a motion to move the consent agenda as presented.
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Moved by Christopher Lopez.
Can I second?
Mark. I'm going to make that one go to Councillor Shannon Kaur for a second. Any further, I guess no discussion. All in favor, please unmute and signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, please unmute and signify by saying no. Okay, assuming that you were able to find your unmute button, the consent agenda passes unanimously. Just a reminder to all of the board members to please complete the Code of Conduct and Conflict of Interest forms and get those sent back in to Janet Carlson as soon as possible. I know some of you have already gotten that done, and thank you very much. Okay, so there are no business items today with the ORS 190 board. And that takes us to item D, which is the year in review. And I'm going to turn it over to Janet Carlson and Jan Calvin. And they presented a presentation to help us remember some of the things from this last year. There's been a lot that has happened in the last year in our region. And sometimes we forget that was like a whole year ago. And we don't have that reference because we're so busy doing the work that's in front of us. So it's good to reflect. And I appreciate this highlight reel of 2021. Jan and Janet.
Thank you, Kathy. Dan's going to put the PowerPoint presentation up so we can screen share it. And the two of us are going to tag team on this. And because we really want to get to our other business today, breakout sessions, and we have an outstanding keynote speaker, we're going to gallop through this. It's not going to be lingering on any particular point. But I think in collection, you'll see that there's so much that has happened. So Jan, if you change the next slide. So this is the 2-year anniversary of the Mid-Willamette Valley Homeless Alliance. Oregon 504 is our number for a continuum of care. And there's a picture of us back on February 13th, 2020, when we had our first meeting in person. And I think we had another meeting in person and then quickly moved to Zoom meetings because of COVID. Next slide. So these will be just highlights of the year in review. So I'll start, and a year ago in January, we had a coordinated entry system annual evaluation report, and Jan's going to tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when people think about coordinated entry, you often think that, oh, that's people getting an assessment. But the whole system has to do with access. Where do you go? How do you get information, the marketing, the equity issues, the referrals and prioritization. And so it was a very robust system, came up with literally about 100 recommendations and knocked through many of those. And we just recently did another annual evaluation. So it was tremendous to see the education going on, as well as how our system can evolve and get better and better through the joint work.
Thanks, Jan. And then also a year ago on January 26th, we were involved with our very first annual point in time count as a continuum of care with activities conducted over 2 weeks. This slide is one that Jan's going to talk about.
So the collaborative committee, many of you have been to these meetings, and we're in discussions looking back and saying, you know, what has improved in the system since we started working. So we did a 1 year look back, and so now it's a year later, but we're going all the way back to January of 2021. And systems pieces people talked about was the networking opportunities with so many committees and virtual meetings, reducing the travel, so more time to work, and in practice, about improvements through the coordinated entry system. So it was brought up, including alignment with, at that point, the fire evacuees were hot on people's mind, no pun intended. Under practice, looking at the improvements that benefited the clients, improved relationships among the agencies really benefited the clients because we saw preventing the return to homelessness. So starting to see the inklings of data there. And in capacity building, so much more collaboration among agencies and sharing of resources and joint scheduling of staff. It was really a great review.
This one's yours.
Thank you. We'll get into a flow. So some of you may recognize this picture from the Statesman Journal when Church of the Park first opened our first ever regional managed camp. Reached capacity within 24 hours, and that food and showers and the navigation services that really made it a village so that it wasn't simply a cluster of tents. So congratulations, and it was a great out the gate for managed camps.
Then came February. So we had our first annual Continuum of Care Summit last year, a year ago on February 11th. We had 109 participants representing 63 organizations. Just as a sidelight, it took us about 45 minutes to do introductions. So I think we did really well to do that in 5 today, even though we didn't learn as much about each person. And then the very next day, the historic ice storm hit the Marion-Polk region. In March, Mountain West Investment Corporation announced granting us a second year of a grant that was endorsed by the community business and education leaders. On March 19th, Oregon Housing and Community Services announced its intent to award us a $5.5 million grant for emergency solutions, COVID activities. And then in April, we received the report that we worked on for about 9 months with the Willamette University Atkinson School PACE team on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in fact, our keynote speaker is going to really focus a lot on that today. Church at the Park opened its first set of pallet shelters, and there was a coordinated entry training that Jan's going to talk about.
Yeah, coordinated entry, some of those improvements were expanding the ways people could access it, which means we expanded from 8 locations to 6 locations, or excuse me, from 1 location to 6 locations, and we are going to expand now to 8. So the training to do that with fidelity, so that over 20 people are now trained to do assessments. That's what happened that day.
Now we move to May. Arches received a grant from Oregon Housing and Community Services and Legacy Health to help underhoused farm workers. As an alliance, we got our first federal grant from HUD for $10 seed money. And we're still kind of wrestling with how we report on that. Anyway, and then on May 28th, the Oregon legislature allocated $5 million to cover 2 years of the Salem Navigation Center operations.
Rolling into June, we had 7 different organizations who do street outreach. The managers have been working together to develop a policy for the alliance on the goals and the purpose of outreach and how that would be woven together between each agencies and the sharing of resources.
And then also in June, Pacific Source joined the Alliance board. So we got a new member, which we were very excited about. The city of Salem unveiled its plans to spend millions of dollars of its federal COVID relief funds for homelessness, and Northwest Human Services expanded its services.
And by the time that June hit full stride, we had increased the percentage of HMIS agencies, which means those who are providing housing using our common database. That's up from 23, 25% when we first became a COC. Then the collaborative committee acted upon that PACE team recommendations around DEI and chose two high priorities to drive forward: the creating a clearinghouse of resources that can help elevate people's capacity around these issues, and also how do we functionally make room at the table for diverse voices in a meaningful way.
In July, CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Funds were distributed by the city of Salem to a host of organizations that you see on your screen. I won't read those to you. And then also the ESGCV grant, the 5.5 million that we had was distributed. So Jan's going to talk a bit about that.
To give you a little insight, when they said they give us 5.5 million, you can say, well, that's great. It's definitely going to be put to good use. And it was put to good use, is currently in 4 different ways, actually multiple ways, but 4 specifically: outreach, 11 new staff for our entire region. You can see the agencies, some of them for the first time doing outreach, others expanding their service, which means expanding their scope into more rural areas, you see with Arches, or into the population of youth services even more deeply. Rapid rehousing, this is what's considered permanent housing. It's getting people in with rent assistance, but also the navigation. So 8 additional staff. Was just talking with some folks today from Family Promise, and just agreed that people just don't get into housing unless they have these advocates or these navigators helping them. So it's a great boost to the region. Then emergency shelter was another area for the ESG funding. And you can see what that means. It's a whole variety from day shelters, that counts, to the managed camps we've been talking about, project turnkey hotels. We've got 2 organizations that made that happen, turning hotels into locations that are longer term places to launch into permanent housing. Winter warming, of course, you're familiar with, but then there was also this thing called emergency shelter under emergency shelter. It was a new way to take fundings and on a temporary basis that's not winter warming, but can expand it beyond a day-by-day sheltering. And then using the hotel motel, we were able to extend, and that's happening on an ongoing basis all across the region now.
So the Alliance, actually from before we were formed, joined Built for Zero. And this is a national initiative. We're one of the cohorts and we receive technical assistance. Really appreciate Kaiser Permanente for helping us take that first step, and Community Action for jumping on board. People have been working on a team. Jan Calvin, again, is the person that's really helping to spearhead that. But in July, they finally met this 28 quality by name list criteria and designed an outreach strategy called Open Door. Also in July, we approved memorandums of understanding with Salem and West Valley housing authorities, Sable House and Center for Hope and Safety. The federal government made additional emergency housing vouchers available. And so that it was required that the housing authorities partnered with the Continuum of Care. So we were able to do that, and so they could receive those. And we received our first real planning grant in July for $30,317.
And also in July, the board officially updated the strategic plan that actually folks have been working on updating for the previous 3 months. It was an iterative process with discussions happening in different committees and subcommittees and the collaborative committee, as well as the board, to make it even more robust and also more focused plan. I encourage you to go to our website to take a look at the latest plan.
And then we can't leave July without acknowledging the fantastic news that Union Gospel Mission Salem opened its new men's mission with 284 beds, and want to give a big shout out to Dan Clem and all the people that worked with him to make that possible.
And we're not quite leaving July because we want to acknowledge that we did an expansion of our organizational structure to shore up and support one of our highest priority populations, and that is youth. The Alliance approved a new Youth Action Board. We just added more members to it. It has a cap at 20, so there's a little bit more room for them, but they've just been one dynamic organization. The young people gave themselves a temporary name of Backbone, and there's a wonderful story I'm not going to get into about why, but it just really shows their commitment to working in this field and being leaders with us. The Alliance also submitted then a youth homeless demonstration program grant, very much informed by those young people. And then, lo and behold, in less than a month, HUD says, great, you can have $3.7 million for the region to create this plan and fund real services that will prevent and end homelessness for young people. Very exciting time.
So now we move to August. Vet Care received $1.5 million from the VA in Portland. And that was exciting to expand care for veterans. On August 18th, that was kind of a red letter day because HUD released their notice of funding opportunity for the Continuum of Care program. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in the next slide about that. But this was the first one that we did as our own Continuum of Care, because the prior year that there was a waiver because of COVID, and Continuums of Care didn't have to do that. And on August 19th, the Salem Police Department began launching monthly meetings with community outreach staff to expand relationships that benefits people who are unsheltered. So this is the list of things that happened with that launching or dropping of the notice of funding opportunity. We, as a Continuum of Care, ended up hosting a TA workshop, technical assistance workshop. Local applications were submitted. So during the month of September, those that applied were busily writing their applications. We, as a Continuum of Care, hosted a review and ranking subcommittee to score the local proposals, and Lisa Trowernicht and Josie Silverman Mendez were heavily involved with that. On October 14th, the Alliance Board approved a final prioritized list of projects that we included with a consolidated application that was 189 pages. So that was a lot of writing, but because we had so many accomplishments, it was really a pleasure to write and kind of see everything that had been done in that past year. And then on November 12th at 6:22 a.m., it was the application was submitted to HUD.
So along when that was happening, in August, the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde broke ground on the newest affordable home ownership project, 35 new units. And in September, Community Action's Home Youth Services got a 3-year grant that will help support a van and street outreach. So again, going deeper into that young adult and youth population.
And that one's yours too.
In September, you can see a number of things happened all within about 10 or 12 days. In Salem, volunteers hosted the micro shelter event down at the Riverfront Park, and it has been a huge success with nearly now 100 micro shelters being funded to be placed. Salem Housing Authority, they hired a landlord navigator for the first time to help connect the voucher clients with housing. So again, we see people just don't get housed unless we have additional advocates and navigators. Really helpful. HUD conducted their first audit of Community Action Agency's COC funded programs since 2017. So it's our first time running through the audit. And according to notes from Jimmy Jones, their director, he said it is far and above exceeded any other audit that they've had prior to that. Great job.
So in October, this is the result of a number of those grants and funding sources that we talked about earlier. Family Promise was able to expand its family shelter. Gales Lodge in Polk County added case management to their transitional housing program for veterans. A Ray of Hope Today in Woodburn began renovation, and you can see all the things that they added there on the slide. And Marion County received $5 million to benefit wildfire victims in the Sandy Ann Canyon.
The October 14th we added 2 new board positions on the recommendation of the collaborative committee, which was looking at first at the DEI Voices of Lived Experience recommendations. And so those 2 additional people are now permanently voting board members as positions on our board. Street outreach, safety training there with the Woodburn Fire Department. That was our first ever joint training. I think we had about 25 people going up to Woodburn and do that in person. Health and safety subcommittee members were appointed to a brand new committee there, and they're taking on a huge load of work, determining what their work plan will be. And we also had a housing and LGBTQ discrimination training with Fair Housing Council of Oregon, very well attended.
In November, warming shelters began, and so Arches added van trips for a number of Salem locations, and Polk County Warming Shelter Network included locations in Falls City and partnerships with churches in Dallas, Monmouth, and Independence. And also in November, we were really excited to celebrate with Salem Housing Authority about Redwood Crossings and their pilot program, which provided on-site behavioral health resources with help from Marion County Health and Human Services. City of Salem also was working with United Way to expand affordable housing for seniors through tiny homes. And then Arches, Jimmy was at our meeting, I think, when he announced that over 16 months, they provided $25 million in assistance to more than 4,000 households.
On the heels of that, in November, the collaborative committee appointed or created the DEI subcommittee. We had more training with mental health experts from Marion County Health and Human Services, and then more training on the outreach folks from Home Use Services. The joint trainings have been very well received, as I mentioned, and just opening their doors, the Center of Hope and Safety's Mosaic program, which was that Project Turnkey, supported in part by ESG funds.
And then in December, the Salem City Council approved $150,000 for the Alliance, and that's going to go to support diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and also for a future housing summit. We're in the process of working with Salem right now on the grant documents. And Marion County provided $7,200 to support our rural issues work. So want to thank Salem and Marion County, and also our Vice Chair and Vice President, Chris Hoy, and State Representative, who really championed those initiatives. Also, you see the picture there of the Arches Inn, and that groundbreaking happened with community action during December. Very exciting project.
December continued with excitement on Yaquina Hall with the Salem Housing Authority's financial closing for the new 52-unit permanent supportive housing project that will open up about a year plus from now. Did additional trainings with the collaborative committee presented by Church at the Park this time on trauma-informed practices. And then snow came again and our warming shelters were activated. And I hear they're going to be activated again in a day or two. The collaborative committee took a look back at the entire year with participation this time. You can see that over the course of the year, 244 people representing over 100 agencies had participated in meetings. We also have people who don't represent agencies, 19 this past year, participating in meetings. And when folks are participating, we got 33 organizations more than 50% of the time. And an average of 37 of these organizations are coming to every meeting, say the 11 meetings plus the summit. That makes 12 meetings for the year. You can see an average of 55 people, and actually that's grown from about 40 on up to 65 people. But over the course of the year, you get the idea.
So we decided to add January and a little bit of February to the 1 year in review rather than ending in December 2021. There was some more expansion of services in January. Sheltering Silverton expanded their day center to include evening sheltering. Polk County announced the purchase of a fourplex for transitional housing for the reentry population. And the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde received a grant from HUD for tiny houses. And also in January, there was an outreach training that you can see there on safety and compassion in the 2022 pit count. On January 24th, Marion County announced $3 million contribution to support the local navigation center, which Salem is very excited about. It was actually in Mayor Bennett's State of the City speech yesterday. He highlighted that. And then we had our second opportunity to work through the annual point in time count, and we're just gathering the data from that count now.
And trying to envision 2022, I could go on, for another hour in this? We took just a couple of things that are going to be happening system-wide, the system of creating a data dashboard with data that is understandable for the full public. That's a project for this coming year. We'll also be doing case management surveying to look at who we have as a pool of case managers across the 2-county region. What are their skill sets, their needs for support, and the like, so we can put together a plan to enhance and hopefully expand case management. And we are just about ready to finalize the coordinated entry policy and procedures manual through, again, a pretty robust process of input. But if you look at programs, that's really exciting. So we will finish up the YHDP comprehensive community plan, and youth projects will be funded to the tune of close to about 3.5 million when you take out some of the planning grant dollars. Those dollars will be renewable in our community. Hope Plaza is going to break ground. Was just talking with Jane today about those units, and funding is all coming together to make that happen. Shangri-La is looking to open residential treatment homes for people with complex mental illnesses, huge need in their communities. And United Way will be into the construction of those tiny homes that we talked about. And there is so much more.
So this alliance is really, it's not about this organization and this board, it's about the entire community working together, and the hundreds of people that are on this Zoom call and those that couldn't join us today. You can see this was just a few highlights of what happened in 1 year and how much activity has gone on and how much has come out of all of that activity. So our goal as an alliance is to end and prevent homelessness. And through your hard work, I think you can see that we are really working towards achieving that. You can see our contact information. We also are improving. We have a new and improved website at mwvhomelessalliance.org, and we are now on Facebook. So share our Facebook page with your friends. Follow us on Facebook as we start seeing greater accomplishments here in 2022. And with that, we are done. Thank you.
Hardly done. I think we're still in warp 10 moving forward mode. That retrospective really took me back, and I think all of us who have been involved in this work, and we can get so focused on today and tomorrow, but to realize how much we can get done when we work together in a focused, informed, collaborative, meaningful way, that people's lives are being changed both in the present and for long term. I know we all have people say, well, nothing's happening. See this, see that. And I point out that the person who is being served is not the person that they see there anymore. They're the person who is now housed, warm, back to work, becoming healthy, becoming more connected with their family and community. And our success is, for the public eye, is what they don't see. But as soon as you get involved with caring for people, is what you and I and so many people in our community see every day. From the bottom of my heart, to every single person on this call who touched the lives of people and have made it your purpose to make their lives part of our lives, instead of an us and them, make us a we that cares about them individually and is making progress toward being a truly inclusive community. Thank you. I cannot thank you enough. And when we look back at 2022, I hope we look at it just like we did 21 and go, wow. And we are moving forward even more. It is truly my pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Johnny Lake. And I know, I think, Jan, you have Johnny's biography to put on the screen. It was truly my pleasure to hear Johnny Lake at the diversity training for state employees. My day job is with a state agency. And before we went to Zoom training and so forth, Dr. Lake was our keynote speaker at least a couple of years that I was able to attend as a state employee. His ability to communicate, connect, to invite, to make you feel warm and then inspired, to build relationship, to broaden relationship, to take us to a whole new level of relationships within our communities, our sphere, and to push even beyond what we think what we can do was something that I took away from his presentations. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to share with us today. Dr. Johnny Lake, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of our Homeless Alliance Summit today. And we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and work with you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to listen about the work you are doing and what we are trying to do, because I think everybody in this conversation knows that we have a lot of work to do, and we need everybody in this conversation. You guys know I'm a professor, right? So I always have too much stuff and always try to teach too much, but this conversation feels more simple today because I've known Jan for most of the time I've been in Oregon. I've known Janet for most of the time I've been in Oregon. So I don't feel like I'm your teacher. I feel like I'm your colleague. And I want to encourage you to use this time with me. Dialogue is what I teach my students. It's the only way that we actually learn. If you had to look around this group and say, who knows the least about what you are doing, it's probably who? The guy who's leading this conversation. So your questions, your interaction with me is really important to help guide this conversation to where you might need it to be. The chat is a wonderful place to put a question. I think Jan and Janet are going to be monitoring the chat, and please don't hesitate. If you agree, say so. If you don't agree, be even more willing to say so and to help me to be able to guide this conversation to where we might need it. What we have here is successfully navigating multicultural contexts. That's what we settled on for a title, but it's really broad because we are very complex communities. So what I did was put a little statement at the bottom. We must understand that diverse cultures and recognize the challenges and the strengths of our communities in order to help meet the needs of children and families we serve. I just got done with this conversation today about how important relationship is. We talked about what is an ally. This was with high school students. And can you be an ally without relationship? It's not gonna work. You need that relationship in order for that allyship to actually work. And who's the beneficiary? Because often the ally thinks they're the ones who are benefiting the other people, but it's a two-way street. It's a dialogue, and both benefit. In fact, if we don't have relationships with those other communities who are different than our own community, we won't have the opportunity to learn about them. This is why it's so important. I start out with something that I want you to start doing with your meetings, with your teams. It's called check-in. And typically our greeting is, hello, Jan, how are you today? The response is,
I'm fine.
I'm fine. Ask me, how am I doing?
There, Johnny. Yay.
I'm fine, Jan. How often do we do that? Every day. We go by each other. We don't even take a minute or so. And this is an opportunity that I want you to think about, because we do have this much time to actually check in with each other. The most important part of this little narrative I have here, the check-in is a chance to communicate with each other at the beginning of a meeting or beginning of an interaction. It is done to create space for each of us to see how we are really doing. So we need to go more than just I'm fine. Looking down to the last paragraph there. Check-in helps us to develop better communication skills, understanding, empathy, and a sense of community for the group. So when you see each other, it doesn't take very long to ask a really significant question. What's the best food you've had lately? Janet, what's the best food you've had lately?
I had Thai food the other night. Oh,
We can go have Thai food together, because that is my favorite food too. Is that something significant to know about each other? And continue those conversations. This became some part of my presentations because I have students who said, Dr. Lake, the most important part of our class is when we do check-in. And I'm like, why? Because I learn more about these people during check-in than I do for the rest of the day. So if we take those couple of minutes when we see each other, I guarantee you it'll help us to better communication skills, understanding, empathy, and a better sense of community. So I created a prompt for our check-in today, and it's one that challenges most of us. And basically the question is, where do you have authentic, legitimate, and meaningful interactions with another culture different than your own? See, turn the mirror. Because before we do work with other people, we need to do whose work? We need to do our own work. And so I'm gonna give you a couple of minutes and you can share in the chat or you can talk to me, but when was the last time you had legitimate, authentic, and meaningful interactions with another culture that's different than your own? And sometimes I ask for 3 and people can't come up with 3. I said, somebody give me 2. I've had large audiences, they couldn't come up with 2. I said, somebody give me 1. And what this demonstrates for us is that we don't have those spaces where we have that opportunity to have these meaningful, legitimate, and authentic interactions with other cultures that are different than our own. This is a weakness of our community. And I want you to think about this, especially for the work you're doing. Because when we create those spaces, we're able to build those relationships, which our DEI work, success of our DEI work will be based on how strong those relationships are that we end up sharing with each other. And these are things that I've learned academically, but these are things that I learned in practice because I didn't grow up in Oregon. In fact, I get invited to a lot of kindergarten and first grader classes. I don't know exactly why, but they love for me to come to kindergarten and first grade. And I come to kindergarten, first grade, and I'm 6'2", and the children are like 1'1", so it's kind of hard to get a connection. So I get on the floor, and the kids gather around me like little chickens. And I said, where do you think I'm from? Anybody want to be a little kindergarten or first grade? Guess what they say? Anybody want to guess? Where am I from?
Texas.
You're not being a little kid, you thinking. That's what the little kids say.
Africa.
Exactly. And they don't say it hesitantly. Africa. So already by kindergarten and first grade, children have learned to see people, my skin color, from Africa. I said, how did you get Africa? I was confused. I said, I don't have an African clothes. I'm not speaking African language. I don't have an African headdress. How did you get Africa? They said, because of your skin. I said, what about my skin is Africa? I don't have a map drawn on me. I don't have Africa written on me anywhere. Well, because you are Black. So context-wise, for what our children are learning, by kindergarten, first grade, they've already learned to think of Black people from Africa. So I asked them, how many of you guys are from a German family? Are you from Germany? No. How many are Irish? I'm Irish. Are you from Ireland? No. So can you look at somebody and tell where they're from? No. So if you really want to know where people are from, what should you do? Ask. You guys just had a kindergarten lesson. I hope it wasn't too complex for you, because sometimes these things are complex for adults. Because people will see me and they say, well, you know, I didn't even know she was black. You know how many times I've heard that in Oregon? Even to this day, I'll be the only black person in the room and somebody has the nerve to walk up to me and say, I didn't even know she was black. It's like, what in the world did they notice? Because I'll ask children, where do you think I'm from? I'm not from Africa. Where do you think I'm from? I say, I'm from Tennessee, which is about halfway to Africa. But do you think it's a different culture than here? And the children recognize that, you know, because it's so far away from here, that yes, it's very different. And I said, in fact, where I grew up, everybody was black. At my house, if you came out of my house and went left, you got to the church. Everybody who went to my church was black. If you went to the right, you got to my auntie's house, Vaseline Horton. Anybody know her? Ain't Vaseline Horton. Little black woman, wore these long aprons, worked in the yard all the time, was the biggest tattletale on the street. She got me more whippings than anybody. She called my mom on the phone and says, go look in the backyard, see what your boy's doing. Got me a spanking that day. Next door to her was my other auntie, my Ada Lee Lake. She wasn't like her. She wouldn't tell on you. She'd give you a fair warning. If you do that again, boy, I'm gonna have to tell your mama, so you better quit. So if you quit, it didn't make it home. Plus, she made cookies, cakes, and pies all the time. Next door to her was my third grade teacher, Miss Brown, who was the meanest teacher at school. When you went in third grade, you prayed that Miss Brown was not your teacher. So she was strict at school. She was also strict at home. Our ball went in the yard one day. She picked it up, walked in the house, and kept it for like 2 weeks. Finally gave it back to us. Keep your darn ball out of my yard. And everybody up that street was either related to me or familiar enough that I could walk into the house without even knocking. And everybody was black. So by the time I'm 10 years old, 4th grade, and I'm walking up and down Pruitt Street, and I look up and I see Kathy walking on Pruitt Street. What's my first conclusion at 10 years old? She must be lost. Or she's selling encyclopedias. Or she's come to turn somebody's electricity on and off. Or she come to collect insurance money from somebody. Or she's undercover police and she think we don't know what they look like around here. They look exactly like her. If you gave that little 10-year-old boy 100 reasons for why Kathy was on Pruitt Street, would one of them be she bought a house and she's gonna live here and be my neighbor? So I want you to think critically. How does a 10-year-old know so much about a person that they've never even met? Where did this information come from? Because nobody told me with my mouth that Kathy does not belong on Pruitt Street. But I've learned from the context around me. And if you think of what that context was, it was a monocultural context, which means how many lenses did this little boy develop for the world? One lens that clearly tells you two things, really important things. It tells you who belongs, but it also tells you what? Who does not belong. And nobody had to say it with their mouth. Now, here's the point I want you to take away from this. How many people, in fact, grew up in a monocultural context? Let me see your hands. Where most of the people around you, they kind of look like you, walk like you, talk like you, were like you. And you can put it in the chat as well. So in this modern 21st century, most of us have grown up in what kind of context? A monocultural context. And you developed a monocultural lens. And when you left home and moved out into the big world, did you leave that lens at home? What did you do with that lens? You brought that lens with you. And now you're expected to operate in a multicultural context, but what kind of lens do you got? You got a monocultural lens. Is that going to work in a multicultural context? Because stuff is not going to look like you used to seeing it. It's not going to work like you used to seeing it. And it's very, very difficult to change our lens from a monocultural lens to a multicultural lens. And this applies to all the identities that we run into that are not familiar or like us. Race fits in there, gender fits in there, class fits in there, poverty fits in there, ability, disability fits in there. And so we get beat up pretty good with a monocultural lens until we learn to do what? Develop a multicultural lens. And this is not easy for human beings. So when I ask this question, it always is a challenge and a difficulty to figure out where do we have, I mean, my students at the university, we have 18 weeks. And at the end of the class, they're like, Dr. Lake, where am I supposed to have an interaction with another culture different than my own? Everybody in Eugene is white. I saw some Black people in the mall. I thought about walking up to them and saying, hey, introduce myself, but that felt really weird. So when you think about tackling DEI, tackling relationships with those other communities that are different than your own is significantly important. So I came from Tennessee, where my grandma told me you're a pretty little Black boy. And you were so smart, study hard, you can make a smart man one day. And she said you got pretty teeth, so brush them so you can keep them. So I came to Oregon at 19 years old on a dare. You want to go to Oregon? I'm like, sure, I'll go to Oregon. It can't be that much different than Tennessee. It's in the United States, right? I did not know where I was coming at all. And I got here and it's like, everybody in Oregon is white. I didn't see anybody in Salem when I went there who was not white. Most of the time, it was like everybody was white. Didn't see Latino people because this was in the 70s. Latino people, I started seeing when I went outside of Salem. And what was their role? I went to Mount Angel. I'm driving through Mount Angel. I saw a man who had an afro like me, and he was walking cool like I used to walk. And his tennis shoes were untied when I went by. And I said, and I looked and he was Black. And I said, that's another brother. What is he doing out here in Mount Angel? So I made the block, came back around. I said, hey, brother, what's happening? He looks at me, he says, no hablo inglés. I'm looking in the face of another man whose skin is dark as mine, his hair is like mine, everything else, but his culture was completely different from mine. And so that's when I started learning about the Latino culture. I got invited to a quinceañera in St. Paul. I didn't even know what St. Paul was. And I didn't know what a quinceañera was either. And I'm like, what's a quinceañera? It's a party for a 15-year-old girl. And I'm like, I don't want to be hanging out with 15-year-old girls trying to get me in trouble. And they're like, no, the party is for everybody. So I drive out to St. Paul in the middle of nowhere, in the top of a church with a huge community of Latino people. I'm not Latino, I don't speak Spanish. I'm not from Mexico, but I was at home at a quinceañera. And since then, the Latino community has been as much my community as any community in the state of Oregon. I've worked with their communities on multiple issues. In fact, they asked me to come to the Capitol when they was talking about bilingual funding for Latino kids. And I said, what you want me for? Well, just be there. So I go there, I don't know what they wanted, but I showed up. And they asked me to come up front in the testimony with the senators. And they said, this man is not Latino. This man is not from Mexico. This man doesn't even speak Spanish, but we love him and our communities love him. Our families and children love him. In fact, we claim him as one of our own. Now, I want you to think of the dynamics of moving from a monocultural context where I came from Tennessee to actually starting to practice a multicultural lens, because Latino communities was different than mine, but there was a lot of things we had in common. And I was able to find those things. Still don't have any Spanish, but still able to work with a community that's very different than mine. And so those examples I wanted you to think about when you think about what kind of relationships do you have with other cultures different than your own? What places do you have to start doing that? And I guarantee you, for us to move forward in the future here in the state of Oregon, it will be based on how well we develop these relationships across these perceived differences. Because they are really perceived differences. Because there's no little boxes of healthcare that come in Black, white, Latino, Native American, Asian, all of the different descriptors. Education doesn't come in little boxes that's all broken up like that. Anything that's helpful or useful for your family is likely going to be the same thing for another family. And I think when we look at these differences as some measure of a community, that's why we end up with racism being a real problem in our communities. Sexism being a real problem, homophobia, all of these issues, discrimination against poor people. One of the things I hear from the homeless most of the time is, Dr. Lake, nobody looks at us. Nobody looks at us. And that's based on the way nonverbal communication works. So I'll move forward with a PowerPoint. I always develop a PowerPoint, and it's the guide for this work. But I developed the PowerPoint by myself. That's why I always invite people to comment on what we're doing. So don't hesitate to put any questions in the chat or to actually speak out as I move forward. I wanted to use this one for us to think about how we learn what we learn. Education is from the Greek word, which means to lead out of ignorance. So how many of us are ignorant about something? Everybody. And we will remain ignorant until we become educated. So these issues we are talking about, until we become educated, we will remain ignorant about the different cultures around us, the different communities around us, the different challenges they face, the different assets they have, until we become educated about them. Paulo Freire said there's no such thing as a neutral educational process. It means there's no middle of the road. There's nowhere to hide. He says that there's two choices. Your education has taught you about the system you live in and how to conform to it, or it taught you to think, that last sentence, to deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to do what? Participate in the transformation of the world. Is that pretty powerful?
Yeah, I don't know.
Now, I want you to turn that mirror again and tell me, what has your education taught you? Did it teach you to fit into the system, to go along, or did it teach you to participate in transformation critically and creatively? I mean, seriously, this work begins with you. It don't begin with those people over there or that diversity, which we talk about. Diversity is always somebody else besides who? Diversity is always somebody else besides us. You need to recognize you are part of this diversity. And I don't care if you're white, Black, Latino, Native American, or whatever your identities are, you are engaged in this diversity. It's often for myself. I tell my people, I'm a participant in my own presentation. I'm not sitting up here looking down telling everybody what they can do. This is my work that I have to do for myself just as well as I expect other people to do their work. Please use the chat as well. I want you to respond to this question. Did your education teach you about how to conform to a system? Or did it teach you to participate and change the system? I hate this Apple stuff because my phone and my watch talks to me when I'm not expecting it. Excuse me for that. But let's think about our society. Let's go back to Thomas, George, and Benjamin. How many people heard of those guys? Thomas, George, and Benjamin, founding fathers. They wrote Declaration of Independence, Constitution, established this society. How many people know they were racist? You see hands. They were pretty racist. They thought buying and selling people, human beings, was kind of okay. How many people know they were sexist? That they didn't let their wives vote. They didn't let their mothers vote. Can you imagine going to tell your mom, we're going to give votes to people, but mom, you can't vote. They didn't let their wives vote. They didn't let their sisters vote. They didn't let their daughters vote. They didn't even make it possible for their daughters to vote. They were very sexist. They were classist. Because even if you were a white male, if you were poor and digging potatoes every day, did they call you down to work on the Declaration of Independence? So they were racist, they were sexist, they were classist. How many people know they're dead? How many people know they've been dead for hundreds of years? They have been dead. But here we are in the 21st century having to navigate around what still? Racism, sexism, classism. It must mean that every generation, according to Paulo Freire's quote, what have we done with our people? Have we taught them to conform to a system that's racist, sexist, classist, homophobic, everything else? Or have we taught them to think critically and creatively and participate in doing what? Changing the world. I think that's what your organization is about. I think your organization is really committed to transforming some of these incredible issues that have shown up in our communities as crisis these days. I think for a long time we have worked with these issues, but I don't believe we have seen the kind of crisis we are seeing now, not in my lifetime. The Alvin Toffler quote says, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those people who cannot read and write, because we typically think of literacy as the ability to read and write. But Toffler says, no, that's not good enough for the 21st century. He says, you will be illiterate if you cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Learn, unlearn, and relearn. Which one do you think is hardest? Can somebody give me a response? What do you think is hardest?
You have
Unlearn.
lots of unlearns in the chat.
Unlearn, unlearn. The unlearn gets like 70, 75%. Relearn gets like 15, 20, 25%. What do we miss? How do you know what you know? We are born a blank slate when we come in this life. Means you know nothing about race, gender, class, sexual orientation, ability, poverty, homelessness, anything else. So where does it come from? Where does this knowledge we have come from? How did you learn? If you grew up in a racist household, do you walk around every day saying, I'm a racist, I'm a racist, I'm a racist? You have no idea you are racist until you go and you say something or do something and somebody points their finger and says, hey, that was racist. And what's your first response? No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. And we end up in that crazy argument of trying to prove or disprove whether somebody is racist. So oftentimes the hardest and most uncomfortable thing to do is to surface what? What we already know and what we bring to these conversations. It may help you realize why we continue to see racism being prevalent in our society, sexism being prevalent in our society, because we don't interrogate, how did I learn this? Because if you can't do that, I guarantee you, you're not going to unlearn and relearn. So one of the questions I use with audiences like yours to make everybody uncomfortable, how many people think you're racist? Get them up high. Well, you know, most people don't raise their hand that high. So I often start with social cognition. Social cognition is how this happens, through our social cognition of the world around us. How many people make assumptions? That's pretty easy. I get 100% people, hands up for assumptions. How many people are biased? Let me see your hands. I don't get 100%. It's almost 100, but most of the people, some people hold their hands down. How many people have stereotypes? Don't get 100%. How many people are prejudiced? Don't get 100%. How many people discriminate? And so I always tell everybody, you should raise your hand on every one of these, because this is what social cognition has taught us. And until we start unlearning those things, we tend to bring those things to our interactions with other people. I put this one in here as a college professor because what do you do in these sessions most of the time? What's the least effective way to teach somebody something that they are going to retain?
Sure.
That's why I started subscribing to dialogue as the model for learning, because if you don't create the dialogue, I guarantee you not much learning is happening. I could talk about this all day, but I'm going to continue to encourage you to engage with me. Give me a question or make a comment or something, because reading material, you probably got some reading material. Is that one satisfactory for anybody? We're doing this nice little PowerPoint, this audio visual. Does that get you anywhere you're satisfied with? No. Demonstration. We could do, I got a couple of activities I'm gonna put you through before we're done here. Discussion group. That's where you talk to your colleagues and peers. You get 50%, but that's not a passing grade. Nobody's gonna want that one. Putting into practice what you might have learned. So some of these things I'm pushing you on, if you don't put them into practice, they don't belong to you. But if you put them into practice, you actually get a passing grade. But anybody like that grade? I never was happy with that kind of grade. But if you teach others immediate use of learning, this means your peers, this means your family, this means the community around you. If you share with them the knowledge that you have, it becomes yours. You may use Dr. Lake's story, but you probably got your own stories. And when you share that knowledge with other people, you will get a pretty decent grade. And instead of training suggests a deficit. I always tell people, let's use learning opportunities, because how many of us need learning opportunities? And it's a much easier kind of engagement than what we got to train you. Time is always the biggest factor. I just noticed the time. Here's an activity. Do you guys mind if I get out of the PowerPoint? Because I love to see people doing this work, because this is the best we got these days. I wish I was in the same room with you. I would pick on you and you wouldn't get away with being quiet. But here's an activity that shows you what we are as human beings. And it's a simple activity. And usually I ask people to volunteer to do it in front of people, but I want you to write your name. This is a physical exercise. I want you to write your name, how you'd like to be addressed in this conversation today. You can use your real name, you can use nickname, you can make up a name just for this activity. You can be Wonder Woman, you can be Superman, anybody you want to be.
You want us to write it, or put it in the chat?
Write it. Physical exercise. This is going to challenge you physically. If you got the capacity to be able to do that. Anybody have trouble with that? Not at this point in our life. Were you born writing your name? Anybody born writing your name? So it's a socially acquired behavior, right? You were 3, 4 years old, and mom says, can you write your name? You're like, Mom, no, I can't write my name. I ain't been to school or nothing. Well, baby, we need to get you. They're going to have you write your name at school. So mom got you a tablet. How big was it? Half the table. Got you a pencil. Anybody remember that pencil? Looked like a tree. You had to hold it like this. And she wrote your name up top, and she says, okay, write that name. And you got busy. You were writing. Mom, did I get it right? No, baby, letter out. Dang, Mom, which letter? Because you don't know your letters yet, you know. So she goes with you and, okay, this letter, you left it out. You working hard. You got that letter in there. You share it again. Did I get it right, Mom? No, baby, you got that letter in there, but look, you left this letter out. Dang, this writing is hard. Finally, about middle of the day, you got it right. And Mom says you got it right. How did you feel? Amazing. In fact, you had to run out and tell your friends, hey, I can write my name. You wrote it on the ground for them. Your brothers and sisters got home. Hey, I can write my name. You had to write it for them. You went to your grandpa's house. You couldn't wait to get out of the car. You ran in the house. Grandpa, I can write my name. Let me show you. He gave you his pen and let you write your name. In fact, where did you write that name after you learned it?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. On the back of your door, just about tall as you are. Guess what's on the door? Every Bible I got, guess what's all on the edge of the Bible when we in church? My kid's name. Everywhere you can write that name, you write it until it becomes a habit. It becomes such a habit that when I ask you to write your name now, you don't even have to engage your brain. You can just zip, zip, zip. Somebody says, I need your signature, I'll get it in front of me. If they get it in front of you, you can write the name and don't even have to look. So it's truly a habit. Now, this is a small window into what we are as creatures of habit. We learn a socially learned behavior and we practice it over time, and it becomes almost unconscious, not quite, but almost unconscious when we engage in that social activity. But I'm going to challenge you because I'm going to ask you to change it. I'm going to ask you to write that same name again, close enough to the way you wrote it the first time to make a fair comparison, because I want you to be really, really, really careful now, because I want you to make it look perfectly identical to the way you did it the first time. See if you can make it look exactly the same. Only this time the pen or pencil goes in your other hand. Now pay close, close, close attention to what happens to you as a human being who is being asked to do what?
Something
Change
different.
a socially acquired behavior. How did that feel when I asked you to change a socially acquired behavior? You can put it in the chat, and Jan, we probably should capture the chat. I love these responses. Usually I put them all on the board. When I'm with a group, I put them all on the board, and you end up with 20, 30, 40 responses. Somebody give me one. What was your first response? Physical, psychological, or emotional response to being asked to change a socially acquired behavior?
It's hard.
All right, what else?
Oof.
What else?
Like I failed.
Like I failed. How many people like that feeling?
These already know what it's like because we've done it all our lives. Not a
Yes,
switch.
yes. And if we capture all of these responses, you will see what is the normal human response to being asked to change. And this is a simple activity, writing your name. Is it very complex, writing your name? Let's compare it to racism. Is it more complex? Racism more complex than writing your name? Sexism? Homophobia? Deeply embedded social practices. How many people wanted to put that pencil back in the other hand and just do it the way you've done it all your life? Do you see what human nature is for us? That if we can't challenge ourselves, you will not do anything about these issues. You will revert right back to the same thing you've been doing for most of your life. But if you practice long enough, you become somebody like Kathy, who probably ruins my whole activity because they can do what? Ambidextrous. But usually it's because they hurt their good hand and they were forced to write with the other hand, or tragically, some people were born left-handed and their parents did what? Tied their left hand down until they learned how to write with the other hand. But in any case, the point I wanted you to take from this simple activity, we are going to change socially acquired attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs, what is it going to take?
Practice.
Practice.
Practice, practice, practice. And you will become better. Are you going to be comfortable? Are you going to be good at it? In fact, some people say, I can't do this, and they ain't even put the pencil on the paper yet. So this is why I say this work begins with each one of us. And once you enter the circle with each other, I mean, this is what I teach my students. You become part of the community together. So I want you to count on me as a community, because this little conversation here is not satisfying to me, and I hope it's not satisfying to you. We need to learn in order to become competent. And the few things I've talked about today is just the tip of the iceberg for what we need to learn. In fact, can I give an assignment? I'm a professor, you guys know that. I don't feel like I'm being effective unless I give an assignment. And you guys can return this to Jan, Janet, or to me. I'll put my information in the chat. Because again, I am part of your community. That means I expect you to communicate with me, and I will respond to you. And you can communicate with Jan or Janet as well, because these issues are that important. I don't do this just because somebody calls me and says, you want to do this? I do this because our community needs every single one of us to participate in this work of helping to improve our community. I have a few skills. I have a lifetime of experiences, mostly here in Oregon, that gives me the insights and the opportunity to help in many cases where other people don't know. So I get calls a lot of times about racism and sexism and all of these isms, and I'm actually able to help. So I think recognizing that we need each other is really the point I want to make. But here's the assignment. Oh, I'll go back to the PowerPoint because I had it in the PowerPoint coming up, but I didn't figure we was going to get that far. Let me find it. It's really a challenge. I did it with the superintendents. I had the superintendents who, all the new superintendents for the school board, for the state of Oregon, all the new superintendents. And we went to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a code word in a lot of ways. Don't accept that these definitions are clear, because everybody has a different perception, different definition of some of these things. So developing a shared language, developing a common understanding is really, 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 really important. If I ask you about the diversity of your organization, what are people going to tell me? Or I won't use your organization, I'll use U of O. If I go to U of O and talk to the president of U of O, let's see, Christy Perry, you're going to be the president of U of O. Tell me about the diversity of your university. What are they going to report out to me?
They're going to report out staff diversity numbers, student diversity numbers, and all the training they've done.
And what's the diversity, number one diversity factor they're going to report out?
Students. Race. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Got these people, where they are, what they're taking for classes, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
You get trapped into diversity as a very limited perspective. Equity also has a more deep definition than most people consider. And one scholar says inclusion is painful. True inclusion is painful. Why is true inclusion painful? And who is it painful to if we're doing true inclusion? But here's your assignment, and I can send you a handout if you need it. But this is how complex our identities are. I got that one person there, racial, ethnic, and cultural identity, but I broke it out between race, ethnicity, and culture. Here's your assignment. I want you to, don't go look them up. Don't Google anything else. Go with what's in your brain and in your experiences to this point. And I want you to give me a definition of race, culture, and ethnicity. And Jan or Janet, if it's necessary for me to send you a little handout for that, I got that same handout kind of printed, then you can send it out. But don't go look it up. Please, don't go Google it. Go with what you got in your brain and what you've been dealing with every day when you are engaging these complexities of the people around us. Because nobody shows up with just one part of their identity at work. We show up as very complex characters. And I think our homeless issue, because I've seen a lot of people who've been in our mental health institutions on the street. I knew them from when I worked at the state hospital, and I've seen them on the street, and it breaks my heart. Because we should be providing better help for people who, especially those who cannot care for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
My grandma was amazing. She said, baby, if it's ever in your hand to do good to another human being, she says, never turn your hand against them. And my mother told me this story, said there was a bum who used to come to their house every year riding the train, and said they would fix his clothes, they would feed him food, so he would cut wood for them and do chores for a whole week or so. And then they would send him off with a bunch of food. And my mother told me, she says, one year our bum didn't come back. And she said, we have always missed our bum. They call him our bum. And she told me he was a white man. This is in the deep South where racism was the norm. But this man was someone that my mother, my grandmother took in to their family and helped them. So I feel every one of us need to be that kind of person. If it's in your hand to do good to another human being, Never turn your hand against it. Thank you. And I look forward to the next time I hear from you. You know, I'm a tough professor, so if I don't hear from you, I'm gonna be kind of unhappy with you the next time I talk to you. And keep doing your good work. And please let me know how I can help support you.
And Ethan says hi.
Who?
Ethan.
Oh, Ethan. Yeah,
Yeah.
I be kind of worried about him sometimes because I don't hear from him like I should. Tell him he better get in touch with Dr. Lake too.
I will let him know that. I keep him awfully busy.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what the time is. I know I'm kind of out of time, but if there's any, we're gonna have a breakout group, and I'm gonna push you a little bit harder in the breakout group.
Well, I know that I've seen a lot of the hand clap and everything, and if we could all unmute and clap at the same time, we'd probably blow some circuits. But I think more importantly is the smiles I'm seeing on the screen and the invitation to build relationship that you've been inviting us into. And I'm looking forward to your breakout room as well for more in-depth conversation. This is a group that was well trained by our teachers. There are some cultural norms that we never unlearn, and that's doing our homework. So hopefully we'll have some things to share at our next meeting as we collate our responses to the question of how we understand racial, ethnic, and cultural identity, but also more important, even building on that, how this is relating to our work in serving people in our community in leaving homelessness and becoming even more inclusive community. Thank you so much on behalf of everybody for being part of that, for sharing your thoughts with us and this conversation. And yes, I am pretty much ambidextrous when you're raised by right-handed parents. Even though they were as inclusive to me as a left-hander, sometimes you have to adapt.